Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show. Late news from Washington. The President of the United States suddenly announcing a statement to the media, to the nation, in the East Room of the White House, an unusual venue for a late-in-the-day announcement that was mid the national news reporting. The President announced to accept the resignation of the acting director of the IRS. This is the IRS scandal. Another shoe falls. It's a centipede. There are a lot more shoes coming. CNN is reporting that 2 rogue employees out of the office in Cincinnati are responsible. But then again, the explanation of the Inspector General's report in these last hours points to the Chief Counsel of the IRS or the offices of the Chief Counsel, as well as the Treasury Secretary. Many questions. And the polling is going on right now. We can believe that the president moved tonight because polling is telling him that the American people are impatient with the idea that the IRS is untrustworthy, especially since we're moving into a landscape where the IRS's tasks are going to grow. It will be the chief arbiter of Affordable Care Act coming January of 2014. At the same time, the AP investigation story continues. The Attorney General testifying before Congress, arguing that he recused himself, but at the same time that he thought it was lawful to have such a widespread dragnet to find who leaked or who might have been leaking to AP reporters a story dating from spring of 2012 to do with terrorism and an IED. At the same time, the White House dumping 100 pages of emails of the exchanges between the State Department, the White House, the NSC, the National Security Council, and the CIA between the 11th of September 2012 and Susan Rice, the ambassador to the United Nations, speaking to the nation on the 16th of September 2012 about the events in Benghazi. The word Al-Qaeda was especially debated in that exchange. There are too many pages to summarize other than the fact that the story that was called by the President of the United States 48 hours ago a sideshow is now a well-documented sideshow. I move to the headlines in Asia. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com joins me. Gordon is in Toronto traveling tonight. The headlines in Asia include a dispute that's gone to the extent of murder, 1 man dead, between the Philippines, that is an ally of the United States, and Taiwan, that is an ally of the United States. Not what you'd expect, a shooting match between the armed Taiwanese Navy Coast Guard and the armed Filipino Coast Guard Navy. There is also the headline about the persecution of the Rohingya, the unwanted ethnic cleansed people of Burma. The Burmese president is on his way to Washington. We will speak of that later in the hour. Right now, we go to Hong Kong, because the news there is about democracy. And what's going on in Washington is the transparency of democracy and the Obama administration rushing to satisfy the doubts of the people who elected the president so comfortably last November. Gordon, a very good evening to you. I go to Hong Kong, and I go to our friend and colleague Mike Davis. He's the professor of law at the University of Hong Kong, because Mike, Gordon, tells me that C.Y. Leung, the chief executive of Hong Kong, is more unpopular than the IRS. Is that true, Gordon?
Yes, that is true, John. You know, the IRS looks like a shining model of paragon of virtue, and certainly would be wildly popular when compared to the chief executive of Hong Kong, who wasn't popular even on the first day that he took office.
Right. That's a problem with not being elected. It's this question of legitimacy. And when you get in trouble, they started doubting you, and now they hate you. Mike, we speak to the future, to the possibility that Hong Kong will be permitted to elect someone whom they trust and who can guarantee transparency. The next election, I'm told by Gordon, is 2017. What are the issues for the people of Hong Kong? Not just with C.Y. Leung, but also the idea of democracy in the People's Republic of China. Good morning to you, Mike.
Good morning. Well, I think the biggest issue has been there's, under the basic law of Hong Kong, a chief executive with universal suffrage would be elected based on the nomination by a nominating committee that is supposed to be broadly representative and use democratic procedures in nominating the candidates. And a Chinese official, China has always been a bit uncomfortable with universal suffrage. And so the Chinese official a month or so ago indicated, a leading NPC official indicated that there should be some process of vetting the candidates to be nominated, because he didn't want people who did not love Hong Kong and love China, or people who confronted the central government. So this caused a storm in Hong Kong, because the big fear that the nominating committee will eliminate the Democrats, who are the most popular people in Hong Kong. So this has been a matter of controversy. And now a lot of Hong Kong activists and others are responding. One of the responses has been so-called Occupy Central movement, where one of my colleagues at Hong Kong U, Benny Tai, and other academic Chinese university have promised that by next summer, not this summer, next summer, if a satisfactory model isn't created for electing the chief executive, that they would use civil disobedience and occupy Central and Hong Kong. So this is causing also a storm. So there's a lot of storms on the horizon for Hong Kong.
Gordon?
So, Mike, really what Beijing is saying by this screening process of the candidates for chief executive is basically saying only pro-Beijing people can run for chief executive. And so really that would just nullify this whole concept of universal suffrage, right?
Right, this is the problem. He doesn't say pro-Beijing, but he says you can't be confronting Beijing. And, of course, there's all kinds of spin doctors trying to, in the pro-Beijing camp, trying to water down what he's saying, because they actually recognize, even Beijing supporters and government supporters in Hong Kong, recognize that if the chief executive election is conducted on that basis, the elected candidate will not be any more popular than C.Y. Leung, that they will have problems governing because there will be a sense that it's a fixed election. So this, I think, I think the politics of this are going to get interesting. I myself was involved in the Article 23 debate a few years ago, and it became so unpopular for pro-government people to support the government on this that they balked, and eventually these proposals were dropped. So again, we seem to be having round two of this, where it seems the government or the Beijing supporters have come up with an idea that may unpopular to some of them, because they have to ultimately run for office. And I think this proposal of vetting candidates just undermines the whole idea of universal suffrage.
Mike, several years ago, Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao were involved in trying to impose a set of regulations or orders on the people of Hong Kong. It was rejected. There were a lot of demonstrations. And these many years later, we now have a new leadership in Beijing, Xi Jinping. Is there any indication that he is a new day, a new page, that the people of Hong Kong are relieved of anxiety about Beijing imposing its will? Or is Xi Jinping same as the old boss?
Well, I think he's pretty much the same. In fact, he speaks of reform in the economic area, but at the same time, he has stridently emphasized that the party control has to be improved. And so the idea that he's going to bring about any significant reform, either in China mainland itself or in regard to Hong Kong, seems pretty far-fetched.
And Gordon, I turn to the fact that Xi Jinping certainly knows that the success of China depends upon the success of Hong Kong. That was true in this economic miracle of these last 20 years. And now that there's doubts about China's growth, I mean, we can refer to the manufacturing numbers and inflation. Does Xi Jinping believe he can risk alienating and weakening Hong Kong? Does that suit his purposes?
Well, Xi Jinping is a guy who thinks he can alienate the United States, Japan, India, Philippines, Taiwan, all the other countries around the South China Sea. So I think he probably thinks he can alienate Hong Kong. This is just the arrogance of the Chinese leadership these days, that they think they can do anything they want. Everybody has to agree with them. And I think that's a real problem, because they have become so convinced of their own power that they've lost touch with reality.
Let's see now. Where else is there a story about a chief executive and an administration overreaching with its sense of entitlement? I think we could find one later on tonight. Mike Davis, professor of law at the University of Hong Kong. We're speaking of Hong Kong's future. Hong Kong is a democracy if they can keep it. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show.